Every day, scientists are learning more and more about how human brains work and how many of us don't fit into the old-fashioned understanding of how brains should work. But a lot of ideas about parenting and familial relationships still need to catch up to the reality of human variation. Neurological differences are natural, profoundly valuable parts of being in a community together and in being part of a family. Whoever you are, wherever you are in your journey, I am here to explore with you. We are all in this together. Welcome to Neurodiverging. Hi, friends, and welcome to Neurodiverging. Thanks so much for tuning in with me today. If you're new here, I'm Danielle Sullivan, and I'm your host. Neurodiverging is a podcast and website dedicated to helping neurodiverse folks find the resources we need to live better lives as individuals and to further disability awareness and social justice efforts to improve all of our lives as part of the larger world community. If you're interested in learning more, you can please hit the subscribe button to make sure you're notified when there's a new episode, and check out Neurodiverging on Patreon. I run the podcast and the blog by myself, so come be one of my first patrons and support this podcast. Speaking of Patreon, I want to give a warm thank you to Zach, David, Teresa, and Sara. Thank you, all of you, for supporting this episode of Neurodiverging. Today, I am so pleased to have a conversation with Sally Willbanks, the founder of neurodiversity clothing line Renegade. After many years spent successfully building an art career in Australia, Sally found that parenting her incredible neurodivergent children required her to homeschool them, so she shifted her entire focus to create Renegade, a contemporary apparel brand that aims to shine a light on neurodiversity. Join Sally and me today for a wide-ranging conversation about raising autistic and ADHD kids for success and happiness, homeschooling pros and cons, how she transitioned from painting to running a successful new business in just about a year's time, and why neurodiversity advocacy is so important to her. Then please visit her online at ndrenegade.com or follow them on Instagram at ndrenegade. And enjoy the podcast. Sally, welcome to Neurodiverging. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's so great to have you. I just wanted to get started. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself for listeners who are not familiar with your work?
Sure. My name is Sally Willbanks, and I am Australian, and I'm actually a professional artist. I'm a painter, but I've stopped painting to do my business, which is Renegade. We're a clothing brand that shines a light on neurodiversity. I also have 2 children who are neurodivergent.
Awesome. Thank you. Do you want to talk further about your children's neurodivergences?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. We're loud and proud. I have a daughter who is 9, and she is ADHD, and she is also dyspraxic, and she has a speech disorder. It's a neurological speech disorder. It's called cluttering, and she's also gifted. And I have a 7-year-old son, and he is autistic, and he suffers chronic anxiety, and he also is most likely ADHD, and he's also gifted as well.
That's great. Thank you. Your kids are like the inverse of my kids. I have a 7-year-old autistic son, and then a 5-year-old ADHD.
Okay.
So it's just like, yep. Yeah. It's kind of interesting having 2 different neurodiversities in the same family and trying to communicate with each other. So we'll have to talk about that more.
It possibly makes it more difficult, I think.
It's like, for our family anyway, every family is different. For our family, it's both really exciting to see how different their brains are and how differently they think, and also, really challenging. When one person is stuck on their point of view and the other person just can't quite wrap their head around it. So
causes a lot of disputes.
Yeah. How old were your kiddos when they were initially diagnosed with like the major differences?
Yeah, my son was the first one to be diagnosed. We actually realized at about 10 months he was spinning plates, and I remember thinking, that's what autistic People do. They like to see things, and I didn't think about it more. And then when he was about 16 months, he lost the ability to roll over.
Mm-hmm.
So my husband found him on the floor on his back, and he couldn't roll, and he was just stiff as a board and petrified. And from then on, we couldn't lie him down on his back or roll him or spin him in any way. And then he had a whole lot of sensory issues. All through age 3, we saw an OT for sensory. He no mess, couldn't take his shoes off, wouldn't open his hands because he didn't want to touch anything. And then at 4, we were pushed to get a diagnosis. So he was 4 years and 2 months. And then over the course of the next few years, my daughter was flagged by my son's therapist as something going on. And so we actually went to get her diagnosed for autism, and it turned out it's ADHD and giftedness, and then, dyspraxia, her problems. So
I'm laughing slightly because that sounds very familiar with me.
Yeah, it is a familiar journey for everyone, isn't it? Yeah.
It's interesting because now that I know more about autism and ADHD and how they present, it's obvious that she's not autistic. But at the time when we were initially trying to figure it out, there's so many overlapping traits in some cases that it can be really hard as a parent to see what's going on. So
my daughter's very quirky, which is where the autism part came in. They thought, oh, she's an odd one. I mean, she's awesome, but she's definitely a quirky girl, but she's just quirky as far as I know.
I would say in some cases my daughter is more rigid and more prone to not wanting change in her routine and her plans than my son is, which is, I think, the opposite of what a lot of people think of when they think of autistic kids, but that's just how it happened to show up in our kiddos. So yeah, it's really interesting.
It is interesting.
I'm glad you got access to OT with young kids. We had a lot of trouble accessing OT when mine were very young without a pre-existing diagnosis. I know it's different in different places, but
yeah, we had actually a great team. It was a government-funded organization that's wonderful. They actually assessed him for 3 days and then said, well, we can't diagnose him with autism because we're not his pediatrician, but this is what we think it is. Go give him OT and then go from there.
Yeah, that's really great.
Yeah.
And you were saying that having different brains in your family can sometimes be really difficult. Is there more you can tell me about that? Like, how does it show up for you as a parent too?
Yeah. Well, my son because of his anxiety, he gets very angry. And because my daughter is ADHD and they're prone to being more sensitive and emotional, she gets very emotional. So the combination of the two of them causes a lot of difficulties. Plus, my daughter likes to really move her body because, she feels the need to at all times. And my son hates to see that extraneous movement. And so we get a lot of stop moving, stop dancing. And it's constant.
Yeah.
So, small things like that end up being big things because it's all day, every day.
Yeah. That also sounds very familiar. It's I think of people as such individuals, especially, I guess I know more neurodivergent adults in my everyday life than outside of just my kids. And, we're still on lockdown over here. So we haven't really seen any other kids for almost, outside of very rare instances for almost a year now. So it's just interesting to hear of the similarities with my own family. It's less common than I would like, I think, to see kids with my kids' issues or traits than I would like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they'd be more understanding. If there were more families like ours out there, they'd be a lot more understanding.
Yeah. I wish there were. Is there anything, like, obviously when you're one kind of neurotype and you're raising different neurotypes, there can be difficulties, but is there anything that you find that you think is easier for you than for other parents or of neurotypical kids? I mean, I'm making a comparison.
The thing that came easy for my kids was their reading. They both taught themselves to read or learned to read at 3 with no help from me. So once they could read and their comprehension was all there as well, they have just taken on their education themselves. So that has been easy, that part, because I know people struggle with teaching their children to read at all ages, and I haven't had that worry, but that's pretty much been the only easy thing. They're sponges. As far as intelligence goes, they are absolute sponges, and they surprise me with their knowledge all the time.
Yeah.
But other than that, everything else is more difficult.
Yeah.
For sure.
How do you see that working for them when they're older? Do you expect them to be independent adults?
I do hope so. that is part of the reason why I started ND Renegade, because I don't see them actually working in a typical work situation. I think they'll both be entrepreneurs. They don't follow directions very well. So I wanted to start a business where they can kind of just watch how a business grows and develops, and learn how to be in control of something themselves. So I kind of can see that more in their future than the standard job working for someone else.
It's really interesting to think about how different brains function best in certain environments and self-propel themselves differently. I know I've always done better with the kind of job that has, I'm autistic, a discrete list of tasks that I can just follow the tasks and they go, and then the job is successful. I think also that for my kids, that independence is something that I think about a lot, and trying to figure out, well, what kind of work would they be successful at, and what can I do to kind of start them off on the right foot for that? Because they sound similar to yours again, that they are very clever, drink so much in, remember things that my memory is not like their memory is.
Oh, it's unbelievable, isn't it?
It's ridiculous. It's so great. I have a very good memory for certain obscure things. Like, I'm very much a special interest autistic. I have, certain things that I know really well, and I can do your 3-hour tangent on them. But I think normal everyday things don't stick as well for me. But my kids help me remember so many, like, without me asking them to, just remember what we're supposed to be doing, what step comes after this step when I get stuck.
I always say, can you help me, please?
What comes next? It's so great. It is something that I find very helpful, because I'll just be standing in the room going, what am I doing? What am I doing? And my daughter's like, you were making me a sandwich. And I'm like, okay, got it. I can do it. It's really good. But yeah, and I think that's a really interesting and excellent motivation for opening, because moving from art, because it seemed like you had a relatively successful career. I saw you had several shows and everything for your painting, and to totally switch, this seems like in my brain anyway, a very big gear switch to, a clothing line for neurodiversity.
Yeah, I do have a successful career. Well, it was going successfully. I even have a painting in Parliament House here in Australia. I've got paintings in embassies, and I have a very good art dealer. He's hard to come by. He's not thrilled. But, I spent many hours painting alone in my studio, and it's just so separated from my family. Painting is a very solitary process, and I needed to be not separated from them anymore. I needed to show them how to be independent and make your own money in something that included them rather than didn't. And painting is not practical at all, and I need them to be more practical in their choice. So the many hours alone in the studio just got my brain ticking, and I painted a show. My last show was in February, so I finished up in December of last year, and I haven't painted since then.
Wow. That's a big gap, I'm sure, for having done it for such a long time.
Oh yeah, and I miss it.
Yeah,
I miss
of
it
course.
terribly, but it's just not my time at the moment.
Yeah. And what kind of went into your switching gears so completely, wanting to be with your family and wanting to show them a different line of work so that your kids could kind of aspire to and learn the skills for? But why did you choose, a clothing line specifically, and a neurodiversity clothing line specifically?
I wanted to do something still with art, and I've dabbled in graphic design over the last 2 decades. So I do have all the computer software, and I'm an artist. I need to do something creative. Yes. And my kids like creativity as well. So that kind of, the design aspect seemed like a no-brainer to me. And my daughter was saying, I want to open a toy store, and I want to, and I just figured it had to be something that either they were interested in or was about them. And I'm so passionate about them and their future, and letting them know that they should be proud of their differences, that I just had to do it. I had to do a neurodiversity clothing line, and I couldn't see anything out there either that was comparable to what my idea was.
I know that when I've been looking for more clothing, t-shirts and stuff, they're
not out there.
It's not there. And I remember when I joined Instagram, when I started this podcast, that your account was one of the first ones that multiple other people were following, that I was like, a clothing line. And then I was like, they're in Australia.
Well, that's exciting.
Which, like, it's great that there's neurodiversity representation in Australia, but I was like, wow, that's a huge gap. Like, how is there not something like this? Like, I'm glad you're here, but also it's like, well, why aren't
But
you in every
there's
continent?
not.
It's really amazing that there's such a huge
Yeah,
gap in that.
you can find those very bold, brightly
Yeah, the
colored
puzzle piece
puzzle
stuff.
piece teas that
Yeah.
they're just so offensive. Like they're offensive to look at. The message is
Yeah.
offensive. It's just not good. So I needed to change it
You only started doing this full time kind of in
in
February.
January.
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 Yeah. That's about right when I started this podcast. So that's a funny coincidence.
There you
Yeah.
go.
You've been really successful then in a very short period of time.
Yeah, it has been good. I get messages from people, I'd say 2 or 3 times a week, private messages that thank me for doing what I'm doing.
Absolutely.
And that is enough to keep me going.
Yeah.
Whether they're buying or not, that's not the point. I want I want them to be proud of themselves. And I want them to know that there are other people who aren't neurodivergent who are proud of them as well.
Yeah. That's a really great message. And I think your designs do a really good job of showing the diversity in neurodiversity, in focusing on all the different kinds of aspects and all the different ways people identify. And again, that's something that I haven't seen in other lines.
Yeah, I'm missing a few. Like I can't figure out what design I would do for dyslexia. Like I have all these, but I don't want to just be like dyslexic and proud. It needs to be more subtle than that. But I can't. I'm working on it.
Well, yeah,
I'm working on including the whole gamut, but I haven't gotten there yet.
There are so many different kinds of neurodivergent people. It's hard. I'm struggling with the same thing with the podcast. Like, obviously, I don't want to represent folks that I don't have the experiences of. Like, I'm not dyslexic. I'm not gonna. But I also want to do episodes that are informative about that. And I assume, in a different way, similar difficulties exist when trying to create clothing. That you're trying to sort of create a very small message that packs a big punch.
Exactly. And I want the message to be subtle because I want people to enjoy wearing the clothing. I want them to be, that the clothing has to have good designs, has to be comfortable, has to be tagless. But the message has to be there as well. And kind of coordinating all of that, it can be tough.
Yeah, that's a big challenge.
Yeah.
I also loved when I was on your website, I saw that you have some autistic models, and I assume other neurodivergent people models. Some of the folks I didn't recognize by sight, but some of them I did. How did you go about organizing that? Because I think that's such a great...
That's just a challenge every day. I just contact a lot of people, and most people luckily say yes because it's for a good cause. The message is it's what we want people to... We want the world to know that these people are here to stay and they're the game changers, and who can kind of poo-poo on that message? You know what I mean? Like
nobody.
So most people that I contact say, yes, of course, sure, I'd love to do it. So.
It's just so great that you even went out of your way to find, I mean, it should be like a basic level thing for clothing companies to do, but it's so rare to see, disabled models, fat models, like anybody who looks different than the average, and to see neurodiverse models was really fantastic for me, like people I've actually talked to or people I've actually, so that's great. I love it. So you said that one of the reasons that you started the clothing line was to kind of help your kids learn by doing and learn how to be an entrepreneur by doing. And I know that we talked a little bit about how you homeschool, and how does that kind of learning by doing tie into your feelings about like education for neurodiverse kids, with your neurodiverse kids, not generally, but
yeah, I can only speak to mine, but we have to homeschool because the kids just don't fit the school mold. My son has terrible performance anxiety, like it's shocking. And if he were in school, he would need a one-on-one mentor, and he'd need to be in the special ed class, which is fine, except that he's also profoundly gifted. So that crossover, it's too difficult. Like we've actually been to schools and they've said, look, I don't think we can handle your kids. We don't know what we do with them. And our doctor, we have we've moved, but our old doctor, he's a brilliant, he's a pediatric GP, and he specializes in autism and ADHD. And he just signed my kids off from going to school and said, they're not fit for school. You're doing better with them at home, but do not worry about the academics at all. Focus on Things like cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, catching a bus, going places on their own, just general life skills, paying bills, learning money, to get them fully functional so that when they leave the nest, they're golden.
Yeah.
So as far as education goes, we don't sit and do schoolwork. We can't sit and do schoolwork. My son just has a meltdown.
Yeah.
Yeah. My daughter, her attention span's about 3 minutes, and she has trouble sitting up at a desk. She's got low muscle tone, and she just slouches and slides off a chair. And so that's one trouble. And then my son, you put any piece of paper in front of him and that has a slightly challenging or different problem on it, and it is just the most horrific, anxiety provoking. It's just awful. So we don't do it. We just don't. We do the minimum requirement that we need to for school.
Yeah.
So,
and a lot of the stuff, we homeschool as well. We're new homeschoolers. I know I talked to you about this a little bit, but for podcast listeners, I don't know if it's come up. We started homeschooling in early September because we were trying virtual schooling where it's done on the computer with teachers, and it was just not working. And
I couldn't imagine.
I
could not imagine doing that.
My son, who is 7.5, tried his best. He's kind of a people pleaser personality. He really wanted it to work, and he would sit there and he would do it, but he couldn't tell what was supposed to be going on at what time, and he's not computer literate yet. He's 7.5, so he couldn't click and log into all the programs and move from tab to tab. And my daughter, who's 5, was just like, nope, like ADHD 5-year-old, like, nope, not doing it. I got her to log in at the beginning of the day for the morning song, and at the end of the day for the closing song, because she likes music. But the whole middle, she was just like, nope, I'm not going to do it. So, and then they did attempt to bring us back to physical school earlier this month, but it's already gone back to virtual because the COVID spike. So we didn't want to send them to real life school. And so I just decided to homeschool. I talked to the kids and I was just like, I think we can just do this at home. What do you think? And we all just decided to homeschool. And it's been going really well because we can focus on practical life skills, like you were saying, but also in ways that they care about, because mine aren't gifted in the sense that, and also they're young, so who knows, but they're very smart kids and they're motivated by what they're motivated by, as I'm sure your kids are. And if you can, if you can target the life skill in such a way that you're using something they're already interested in, it's just so much easier to pick up. So I can see why, staying at home and doing this.
I just make sure that the kids, we get out every day. So we do like a family tennis lesson, they do equine therapy, we do swimming, we do homeschool group, so I make sure we get out every day, and then their afternoons are their own, and they do Minecraft and Roblox and Among Us and all the other things that all us parents cringe about. And, every once in a while I go, you've got to do an app, you've got to do a math app so that I can write it down for your, homeschool moderator. But that's it. We live every day just like it's the weekend, really, because I have no choice. I mean, I do worry about it, but what point is worrying about it? I don't have a choice, not at the moment.
Yeah. I personally feel that a lot of, at least I'm sure Australian schools are different than American schools, so my comparison might not be apt, but at least compared to the things I learned in school that I actually use as an adult person with a family who, organizes the grocery shopping and the household and stuff. And I work as an admin online. So I'm definitely one of those solo business people where I don't have to talk to other people. I just want to do my job. But with those skills, I did not learn those in school. I got, thrust out of college or into college. I learned some of the organizational skills just to attend my classes successfully. But after college, most of it was just suddenly thrown into the world and had to pick it up. And I was lucky enough that I was able to, but it took much longer, I think, for me than most neurotypical folks. So if I'd had some of that practical skills education at home when I was younger, like my kids or your kids, I would have just done so much better. My mental health would have been so much stronger in my early 20s, especially.
Well, that's it, isn't it? And I think that learning those life skills, they can do it just literally by living it as they get older. The life skills change for their age, and so they're learning as they go, and they're learning what they're interested in, and they're learning what they're passionate about, because they have the freedom to do it.
Yes, and there's none of this sort of false reward or punishment reward dynamic that you get in some schools where you failed to do the thing and so now you're bad. And then it's very hard to motivate yourself as an adult to do the thing that you constantly fail to do in school, at least for me. So it just messes everything up. So I know homeschool isn't for everybody at all, but for some types of neurodivergent kids, I think it can be really helpful to break away from
I think it's so bad.
Yeah.
It's very hard work for the parents.
Oh, certainly. I feel very lucky. I wish everybody who wanted to do it could do it, because I know lots of parents of autistic ADHD kids who would like to homeschool and just can't do it. But,
right, of course. It's a privilege, for sure.
Absolutely. So, I feel very lucky about it. And I'm sure your kids are doing great. Like, to be able to focus on the things you actually need to be a useful person and a compassionate person and somebody who, can make connections and...
Well, my kids need the most help with relationships, with relating to each other, with relating to their friends and other people. That's where the struggles are with neurodivergent kids, a lot of them. And I just let them fly with that. I have to let them go and play with the homeschool kids. And it's different. People think the homeschoolers don't get to be social. We meet up at the homeschool group every Wednesday and every Friday, and it is a full day exploration. The kids are out hunting, and not real hunting, but like play hunting and exploring, and they're swimming all day, and it's like 2 full days a week where they get absolute free play and freedom. And then usually another day a week we meet up with a family and do a river swim or something, and they just get so much experience with that, and that's what they need the free connection with children. And that's what homeschool's perfect for. And most people don't think about that. They think they're antisocial, but it's the opposite.
No, I think in traditional schooling situations, you have this very falsely structured classroom situation where you're all sitting in your little desks and you're allowed to interact in these certain ways at these certain times. Exactly. And I did personally fine in traditional schooling situations because I understood the structure and I understood what was expected of me. But then as I got older and the types of things I was supposed to say changed and the types of conversations I was supposed to have changed, I was just lost. Like as a young adult, I did not understand what I was supposed to be doing because it was such a different situation and expectation of neurotypical people had for the situation. So I think, again, same thing, if I had been given more, and I had free play at home, but home time was limited compared to school time, I think.
Yeah, of course.
So if I'd had more kind of free play time and more time to sit with feelings and the feelings of other people and think through that. I do a lot of that with my own kids because they're very young, but you can say, what do you think your sister's feeling right now that this thing has happened? And kind of have those emotional deep dives into how to learn empathy and learn compassion that there wasn't really room for in the public school system.
I honestly don't know how people do it. My daughter was crying to me 2 nights ago because she's saying that I don't spend enough time with her. Like, are you kidding? It's like, I am here with you all day, every day. Imagine if you had to go to school. You'd get home from school, you'd have to do your homework, and there'd be dinner time. You get an hour with me a day.
There was no connection time.
I'm like literally like on call, on demand all day to my kids. Yeah. Because they're around me all the time.
Me too. And I like it because I can be sure that they're getting connection. But when they were in school, even with my youngest, was in first grade before COVID at the traditional public school, and he was doing great. But I felt like I never saw him, and I'm like, "You are 6. You're 6. Like there needs to be more. There needs to be more parent connection at this age."
We have just moved up to this area where we're living now. We've moved 9 hours north 3 months ago from where we were living because there was an education center there that takes neurodivergent kids and other kids that don't fit the school mold, and basically it's like just a daycare for kids age 5 to 12 where they get to play and go out in the woods and make river bridges and stuff like that. And my daughter loved it, but my son just suffered too much anxiety being away. But I suffered anxiety. They were only there 2 days a week and I couldn't handle it. It was ridiculous. I was like, I'm so used to having them home. I miss them.
I have the opposite. I just really, don't want to send them to school in a pandemic, obviously. But I also am somebody who very much values my alone time. I think
I thought I would.
I have processing challenges. It's so funny. The parent you think, I don't know. I have this kind of constant battle between the parent that is my ideal parent in my brain and then the person I actually am in real life. And one of those is I want to, and I do enjoy, obviously I enjoy my children very much, and I'm really glad that I can be here with them during this kind of time. And it's really fun to do homeschool together and to see what's going on in their heads. But at the same time, I am a slow processor. I think slowly. I need to like sit with my brain a little bit. Hopefully regularly, like every day would be great, to actually figure out what I want to be doing and what my, what my goals and my, like, what I want out of my life kind of stuff. But also just to do basic practical houseworky things. Like it takes me a really long time to put together a grocery list, or to, pull out all the stuff for dance this week or whatever it is. And I don't have that now. Now that they're home all the time. And
I fully understand that.
And I really do miss like getting them out of the house.
I thought I was going to love that break. That's one of the reasons we moved, because I'm like, I'm going to have a break. I'm going to be able to work on the business. But by the second week, I was like, I don't think I can do this. I just want them back.
Yeah.
And that tripped me out, because I was like, free time.
And then it was like, no. Yeah. Finding the happy medium is nice, because I didn't like when my first grader was in school full days, 5 days a week. Like that was too much. But then not having them gone at all is proving to be a little bit too much in the other direction. Yeah. So,
that's true.
Yeah. And we're also not the ideal homeschool in this situation because of COVID. So obviously we're not doing our groups. They're just kind of, I feel very lucky to have two of them, so they can at least talk to each other, and they're good friends at this age, luckily. But if it were happening when they were a little older, I don't know that I would feel as lucky, because personalities change.
A lot of fighting that goes on.
Yeah. I don't look forward to that age. I know it's normal, but I vaguely remember it as a young kid myself. But so if we want to kind of backtrack a little bit, so you realized at 10 months that your son was spinning, which is very similar. I feel like spinning is one of those very early, like, this is, something different. My kid could spin. We were actually really proud. He could spin anything, like anything you gave him. It didn't matter.
I've got videos of my son at 10 months old crawling and spinning these. I'm like, wow. And
it's amazing.
It makes sense.
It's amazing. We were just like, how did you even figure out how to spin this thing? Like it's so, I can't figure out how to spin it. It doesn't spin, but he was so motivated. And it was really wonderful. But how did you feel as a neurotypical person, like realizing how much neurodivergence was present in your family, especially, now that your goal is trying to kind of promote neurodiversity and make space for that?
Going into it, when my son was diagnosed, I was just devastated. I knew nothing about autism besides watching Rain Man, just what the standard neurotypical person knows. My world was just crushed. And no one could help me, because my family, they were all saying, he's going to be fine, nothing's changed. And of course I knew that, but they knew as little as I did, and I knew they knew as little as I did. So I didn't believe anything they had to say. Yeah. And I just started researching it. And after about a year, after all the research and the books and the TED Talks and the YouTube videos and the podcasts and everything, and after that much therapy that we had, then I started to kind of calm down and go, I think this is actually going to be okay. And now I'm nothing but proud. So in the last 3.5, 4 years, that's a big leap from being absolutely petrified to being so proud.
Yeah. I feel like the narrative of autism, and again, it's probably going to vary because we're in different countries, but at least where I am, the narrative is so negative that anybody with an autistic brain is not going to be functional or happy or I pursued a diagnosis because my son needed speech therapy, and we could only get speech therapy if he had a diagnosis of a stroke or autism. That's just the way our insurance works. So I was like, okay, he's autistic, but the only reason I'm going to go get this diagnosis for him is because we need speech therapy. Yeah. And the team that diagnosed him were so negative. It was so depressing. They were so like, he's autistic. Like it was a cancer diagnosis or like a lifelong, like, and it is, I understand, a lifelong developmental disability or set of, depending on kind of the level and how it affects the person, but it's also not necessarily the
It's not a
worst thing
death
that's ever
sentence.
going to happen to you. Yeah. I feel like a lot worse things have happened.
Yeah.
And also, like for me, I didn't realize I was autistic until after he was diagnosed. And
Right.
so for me, finding my diagnosis was this huge positive of like,
Mm.
this is why I need all these extra things that other people don't seem to need.
Yep.
And that negative perception, like as a parent, can be so
Terrible.
traumatizing and so difficult.
That's what I want to
Yeah.
change. I want
Yeah.
people to know that it's okay to be
Yeah.
neurodivergent. And when parents get that diagnosis for their kids, I want them to know that their life's not over.
I feel like it should be a neutral
Mm.
value diagnosis. Like it's
Absolutely.
not a good or a bad. It's a
It's
this is
just a
how your brain
different.
works.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
So you have to make accommodations going
Mhm.
forward.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. 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 I feel very frustrated that that is. I feel like especially mothers get that. Just since we're the kind of traditional caretakers, we still have, even though it's changing, a lot of this weight or feeling of it's our responsibility to make our
Absolutely.
children quote unquote normal people. And then when you get a diagnosis and you're like, I have failed as a parent, which is obviously false, but
Oh, of course. You
yeah,
sit there and you think about what could I have done or what did I do to cause this or what, of course that all goes through your head because
all these ridiculous.
you're in a downward spiral because you think
Mhm.
it's honestly the worst thing that could happen. And it's
Yeah.
absolutely not.
No, it's absolutely not. I was really pleased when we got a diagnosis because it meant I could access therapies, which is an American insurance problem, but was still very
Yeah.
helpful. But also because the behaviors that I had been interpreting as negative or like purposely
Yeah.
difficult from my kid were not, they were sensory issues. I just had no idea that they were sensory issues because I didn't know anything about sensory processing issues at that time. And having more information about it was definitely a net positive for us, just because it was like, oh, my child isn't actually trying to make my life a horrible horrible existence. He's trying his best to like fend himself off from this really terrible onslaught of sensory information. So having that information was just so valuable, and I wish more
without
people
the
would.
information,
Yeah.
there's no understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you move forward? How can you help them?
Yeah.
Without that knowledge.
Yeah. That's why I think it's so important what you're doing, and also why I started this podcast, is just to get more information and more awareness. And clothing is obviously a great way. I feel like if people were walking down the streets with autistic on their, that's a little, I know that's a little bold, but like,
well, some of them are. I just don't know autistic human design, and it's as bold as it comes, but it's a favorite of mine.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's a good one. So like if you saw 1 in 10 people or even a couple in every 100 people with that, wouldn't it normalize it to such extent? That would just be so fantastic. I want parents who are going into that process like I was, and maybe like you were, to just
Not
feel so much better
exactly.
about the whole process. And as a neurotypical person, other ways that I guess you've had to like defend space or carve out space for neurodiverse kids. Like for one example, I know you mentioned briefly the schools. I know that parents here struggle a lot with wanting to keep their kids in the public school system and getting a lot of pushback from administrators and teachers about their kid not fitting, quote unquote, in the classroom. And some of that is, a difficult situation, but some of that is just a teacher not wanting to change their teaching style.
Yeah.
How have you encountered that, or what other places have you noticed that?
I think it's the same that a lot of neurodivergent people feel just living in the world. Like places aren't accommodating to neurodivergent people. The lights are always too bright. It's not soundproof very well. Noises are too loud. Places are too crowded. And that's the same with school. It's the same with going to the shops. It's the same with going to the movies. That's just the world as it is. And I do think that spaces need to be more accommodating, particularly schools for the kids. I do think that they should be included in environments with all neurotypical, because neurotypical kids can learn from neurodivergent kids and vice versa. I mean, why not have them together? But I do understand that it can cause difficulties if there are some children that need more help beyond the other children in the class. And I don't know how to solve those problems. And I think that it's going to be a long time coming before those problems are solved. But neurotypical people, just myself included, just don't understand neurodivergent people. I don't know what it's like to be autistic. I don't know what it's like to be ADHD. I can only take the word of my children and other neurodivergent people. as a truth because I can't understand it, but my heart and my mind is open to understanding, and I think that's what we would need from the world.
It's very well said. I think it's obviously I don't know what it's like to be a neurotypical person. I do think there's an assumption that neurodiverse people are going to have to learn from neurotypical people, but you're right, it doesn't go vice versa. It doesn't go both ways. There's no expectation for neurotypical people to be learning autistic styles, for example, or ADHD styles. And that is very frustrating, I think, to a lot of us, that we're meant to learn this totally kind of alien culture, and nobody is learning our language in return.
And it goes both ways. I mean, there are enough neurodivergent people out there for this to be worthy of change. It should absolutely go both ways.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree. I think a lot of us agree. And also, you know, as neurodivergent advocates, we see that there is value in neurodivergent people's approaches to the world, like your kids' approaches, my kids' approaches, and they're going to be the future. So if there's value in them, there must be value for neurotypical people too, right? Like the value exists for everybody, And
I think that a lot of the things that neurotypical people struggle with, like the sensory overload, I actually think that neurodivergent people struggle with the sensory overload. I think that a lot of neurotypical people suffer with it too, but aren't as aware. So I think they might go out to a mall or go shopping or to a restaurant, and subconsciously they know that it's too loud and too bright and too crowded, and they come home in a bad mood, but they don't know why. And they've just had the same sensory overload, but to a lesser extent than an autistic person, say, would have going out there. They just don't realize it. So if the world listened to neurodivergent people and made it more friendly and accommodating, I think everyone would benefit.
Yes. I mean, I have sensory processing issues, so I can't think of a way that lowering the lights and the noise wouldn't help everybody, but obviously my brain is my own. But I can't, especially women. I feel like the number of people I've talked to who are neurotypical, who once I explain sensory processing disorder, they're like, oh, that's the thing that I have, I have all the time. I'm sure men have it too, but I don't know.
You don't have those other
I talk to more women. It's a really interesting conversation. So I'm sure like neurotypical people have the same
I think
issues in some ways, and the neurodiverse population has developed some mechanisms to accommodate.
Neurotypical people don't feel it to the same extent, but I think that it just is like one of those underlying, this has put me in a really bad mood, and they don't know why.
Yeah. I can understand that. I know we covered a little bit some of the reactions to your change of career. Like you said, your art dealer was not a fan.
As far as reactions to my career change, there's been a lot of shock and surprise. And I still get people asking, how are your paintings going? And I'm like, well, they're not. Haven't done anything in a while. And I still get a lot of emails from people requesting, commissions. And it's just, I packed up my studio and we moved. I don't have a studio. I don't even have a place to paint at the moment, which is kind of crushing. But, I've got a study now with a big computer and a tablet to design on and things. But it'll come at some point. It'll come. I think that covers that. What was the other question?
Oh, just how you chose ND Renegade.
That's right. It was just the first morning when I knew that I was going to do the business. I thought, okay, I got to have a name. And I was thinking Neurocool. That's where the Neurocool t-shirt comes from. But that was actually taken. That's some scientific term, believe it or not. And I just wanted something that included the letters ND or neurodiversity or neurodivergent. And I wanted it to be a really strong sounding name, because we need to provide these people with the message is pride and strength and belonging. So I wanted the logo and the name to be very strong and powerful, and going against the tide, going against what mainstream believes. And that's where the word Renegade came in. And once it came to me, ND Renegade, I knew that was going to be the name. And luckily it was all available on Instagram and Facebook, and the domain was there. I was like, that's it. So once I got it, it was, I was sold on it.
That's awesome. Yeah, finding the domain is the scariest part.
Not easy, but it was so smooth this time. I couldn't believe it.
So it was meant to be.
Yeah, it was.
Had to be ND Renegade.
Yeah. The goals are to start conversations, to be in every corner of the world starting these conversations, to instill pride in neurodivergent people, to make them no longer feel ashamed. And they are different, but different is good. It's not a bad thing. And while we're advocating for them, I want them to start advocating for themselves. And I think they can do that actually by wearing a t-shirt that says loud and proud, you know, I'm autistic, I'm neurodivergent, I'm ADHD. I think that's a good stepping stone for them to start advocating for themselves, because it will start conversations, hopefully. And we just need the world to understand neurodivergent minds and to show them the respect that they deserve.
I absolutely agree with that. Thank you.
As far as advice for parents, my advice would be to get on Instagram and follow the neurodivergent community on Instagram. I learned so much from Instagram. I mean, I knew about neurodiversity. I knew the term, obviously, that's where the name came in, but I didn't actually know that there was a whole movement. I didn't know it was a movement. I didn't know it was a whole paradigm shift. I just knew there are neurodiversity people with differently wired brains. But I didn't know it was something that people could agree or not agree to. I just thought it was, and that which is how it should be, really.
Yes.
But I learned so much from the Instagram community, and I'm still making mistakes to this day. It's a community that is actually easily offended, and rightly so, because they've been misunderstood so much. And you can only learn from your mistakes. And I learned from reading and everything. But when I do make an error, then of course I change my wording and my phrasing. And there is so much knowledge to be had from the people who actually are autistic and have Tourette's and bipolar and dyslexia and ADHD. We have to listen to those voices, and those voices are easily accessible on Instagram. So I suggest everyone that wants to go to know more, go to Instagram, follow some accounts, start reading, maybe hold off on the comments for a little bit. Just get to know these people in this world, because they're so interesting and there is a lot to learn.
I completely agree with that. I have been so overwhelmingly pleased with neurodiverse folks on Instagram and all the education they offer. And although people do get offended, I don't feel like they're, at least for me, particularly hard to offend. Like, there's also so many, just like any community, so many differing opinions on certain things. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's just so much to learn. It is such a great community. It's a really good, really good resource.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's a great resource.
That's a really good idea. Thank you all so much for listening to Neurodiverging today, and thank you to Sally for being a wonderful guest. Please go check out her website at ndrenegade.com or on Instagram at ndrenegade. Also, a reminder that Neurodiverging, the podcast, is going on hiatus for about 2 months. We'll be back in March with all new episodes, so sign up for the mailing list or the Patreon on neurodiverging.com to make sure you're notified when the podcast comes back. Until then, please take care of yourselves, and remember, we are all in this together.